Another mystery buried deep in the hills of eastern Washington keeps resurfacing. A bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal.
A mysterious hole, a missing man, and whispers of a government cover-up. For over 30 years, Mels Hole has haunted the minds of those who've heard its story. A bottomless pit that defies logic and vanishes without a trace. Who was the man who discovered it? Why did he disappear? And what did a team of investigators find when they sent a drone into the darkness?
On Melwater's property in the Monastash Ridge west of Ellensburg, Washington, there's a hole in the ground that looks like a well, but it's not a well.
What they captured is beyond belief. Let's take you inside one of the strangest legends ever told. This Mels Hole was definitely one of Earth's unexplainable mysteries that went far beyond anything your average campfire tale could conjure. This is a place where logic doesn't make any sense, and things that should stay dead don't. It had to be so mysterious. Even the government supposedly wanted it erased off the map. And just when you think it's all cooked up on late-night radio, a different story comes up again. Despite all the research and expeditions to find the hole, it amounted to nothing. After a couple of years, a group did the unthinkable. They sent a drone into the place where Mel claimed the hole existed. What the drone captured was mind-blowing, because the deeper the drone went, the scarier it became. Before we show you what they found, we first have to rewind. Because to understand why a hole in the ground could have this much attention and how one man's midnight phone call turned into a decades-long mystery, we need to go back to where it all started. The legend of Mels Hole. The Earth has hidden several mysteries that have been uncovered at different times, leaving shocking reactions and questions about how they were created. Well, that's exactly what happened on February 21, 1997, during a late-night call-in show called Coast to Coast AM. Hosted by the legendary Art Bell, the show was already known for being the radio home of the bizarre and the paranormal, which was conspiracy-laced and the downright unexplainable. But on that night, something different came through the static. A man who identified himself as Mel Waters called in and said he lived just outside of Ellensburg, Washington. He seemed calm enough, very polite, and didn't sound shocked or amazed, as there were no traces of heavy breathing or doomsday rants. Just a regular guy with an irregular problem. He said there was a hole on his property. A big one. It wasn't like a well or a pit. This hole, according to Mel, was no ordinary hole. It was bottomless. That's right. He claimed it had no end. Now, at first, you're probably thinking, it's just a deep cave or an old mine shaft. But Mel didn't speak like he wasn't sure of what he talked about. He said he'd lowered a fishing line into the hole with a 1-pound weight attached and just kept letting it spool out and out and out. When he hit 80,000 feet of line, he still hadn't hit the bottom. That's over 15 miles deep. To put that in perspective, Mount Everest could fall into that thing and still have room to bounce around. Insane. If you think the only fascinating thing about the hole was its impossible depth, then you've not seen anything yet. Mel also said the hole was about 9 feet across, perfectly round, with stone bricks lining the top 15 feet, like someone had started building a well but then just gave up when it wouldn't end. He also noted that animals avoided it, and birds wouldn't fly over it. And for people who got too close, well, let's just say things got weird. He mentioned how he saw a dead dog who was tossed into the hole, and later, seeing the same dog running through the woods, alive and wearing the same collar. It was one of the strangest encounters that Mel particularly talked about because the dog belonged to his neighbor. After the dog had passed away, Mel's neighbor had wrapped the dog in a blanket, tied it with rope, and lowered it down into the hole. There were other strange things too, from how ice from around the hole would burn and not freeze to how a black beam of light would shoot straight into the sky. And just when you think it couldn't get more bizarre, Mel dropped this bomb. After he went public with the story, government agents showed up and forced him off the property. There were claims of men in black, strange vehicles, and helicopters circling the area. He said the land was seized, and when he tried to return, he was stonewalled. And they didn't give any explanations, no paperwork, no nothing. Mel's story gripped the show's listeners. As time went on, people couldn't stop talking about it. Was it a hoax, portal, or some freak geological accident? Or was Mel just completely losing it? And when you thought this was all the strangeness that could occur, Mel disappeared. Just like that, his calls stopped. He didn't give updates any longer, and it seemed like the hole and its owner had vanished into thin air. That wasn't the end of the mystery, not at all. In fact, it didn't stop becoming weird. It turns out that people got so curious and started hunting for the location. Conspiracy forums lit up, and over time, Mels Hole went from late-night radio curiosity to full-blown internet folklore. And as you know, mysteries like this don't stay buried forever. Because years later, a group of amateur explorers decided to bring something into the field that Mel never had. And what did they capture when they flew it into what they believed was Mels Hole? Well, that's when things go from strange to absolutely unexplainable. The mystery deepens. After Mel Waters' wild call hit the airwaves in 1997, people were hooked. Some thought it was the next big X-Files case. Others figured Mel was either a prankster or a guy who had spent too much time on the mountain, especially since he stopped calling. They all just thought he was tired of his prank calls till he surprised everyone again with a call 3 years later. In the year 2000, Mel resurfaced for a brief follow-up call to Art Bell. But he wasn't just talking about the same hole anymore. Nope. He said he'd found another one, and this time the hole was in Nevada. And the claims were somehow even stranger than the first. He talked about government contracts and underground facilities, claims that the military was conducting experiments in or around the holes. He even said he'd been taken off U.S. soil and given money to buy his silence. Mel claimed he was shipped off to Australia after talking about the not-so-secret situation that no other person but the government was supposed to know about, and that he'd been forced into silence by people he never fully identified. A lot of things didn't add up when no records showed of a plan called Mel Waters, at least not officially. He had no solid background info, no verified address in Ellensburg, and no documentation that a man named Mel Waters ever owned land in Kittitas County. It was like this man never existed. But if he wasn't real, who was the guy behind the radio line? Now this was a mystery. To prove a point, geologists like Jack Powell, who worked in the Department of Natural Resources, came forward saying a hole like that couldn't exist because, with the details Mel gave, it wouldn't be possible, as the hole would collapse under its own weight from the heat and pressure surrounding it. Even locals in the area said they'd never heard of anything like Mels Hole, and some of them even joked that the only bottomless pit in Ellensburg was their credit card debt. But here's the thing. While the rational explanations make sense on paper, the details Mel described were oddly specific. Too specific, even. And the consistency of his story was 100% intact even after 3 years. It just had to be one of two things. Mel was a really good liar, or there was something to his story. And that's where the divide started. On one side, you had the skeptics. Scientists, geologists, and even locals, all saying it was either a hoax, a prank, or a piece of performance art. They felt Mel was just an eccentric guy who wanted his 15 minutes of fame and radio gold. On the other side, though, were the believers, the ones who pointed out the missing records, the claims of black SUVs in the area, and the eerie silence from the government whenever questions were raised. What if he was silenced because he got too close to something real? Overzealous reporters had set out into the Washington wilderness, following old maps, message board rumors, and the faintest trail of breadcrumbs left behind by Mel Waters, with the hopes of finding anything at all that could prove Mel wasn't making up stories. Unfortunately, they found nothing. And then, like most things wrapped in mystery and conspiracy, the story started fading into internet legend. It was becoming more myth than memory. Just another ghost story swallowed up by time. Or that's what everyone thought. Just when you thought the story of Mels Hole could be the start of the search for a mystery that could change the face of what we thought was impossible, something unexpected pulled it back into the spotlight. Another clue or a dead end. On February 7th, years after Mel's final call, a Seattle news station, KOMO TV, aired a segment that dove into the strange legend still haunting the hills of Kittitas County. It wasn't your typical news piece with punchlines and laid-back life happenings or eye-rolling reporters dismissing it as internet nonsense. But instead, KOMO actually went all in. They spoke to a ton of people who had first-hand information about what Mel had said about the hole, and well, it only added more gasoline to the fire. One of those voices was a man named Red Elk, who was an intertribal medicine man who had lived in the Kittitas Valley most of his life. He wasn't just as interested in the hole and the television station, he claimed he'd seen it. Even more than that, he said his father had shown it to him all the way back in 1961. Red Elk told KOMO that his father had stood at the edge of that pit, looked him in the eye, and said, "This is an endless hole." Now, Red Elk wasn't just another guy that anyone could take as a joke. He was known in the area and even respected in certain circles and had a deep spiritual connection to the land. He described the hole as an ancient portal and something that couldn't be explained by science alone. To him, it was sacred, dangerous, and most importantly, very, very real.
He said, this is an endless hole. And people get it confused with what I call the devil's hole.
But by then, most people had dismissed it as a far-fetched tale and stopped paying attention. KOMO also spoke with Jack Powell, not only because he had so much knowledge about holes, but also because he lived in Ellensburg, just miles from where Mel's Hole was supposedly located. Powell didn't waste time trying to be polite about it. He laid out the facts because he was a man who'd spent his whole life studying about the Earth, so he knew what he was talking about. He pointed out that the deepest mine shaft on Earth was in South Africa, and it only reached about 12,672 feet. The deepest known natural cavern, just over 7,100 feet. And the deepest hole ever drilled by humans? That was the Kola super deep borehole in Russia. And even that only made it about 40,000 feet down before the Earth couldn't handle all that pressure. So the idea of a hole dropping 80,000 feet with no collapse, no pressure issues, and no geological record was what Powell wouldn't believe. In fact, he was sure he knew exactly what Mel had seen. According to Powell, there is a real hole out there. This particular hole is northwest of Ellensburg and on private property. This one is fenced off with barbed wire and all, and not too far from DNR territory. The hole is deep, but not as deep as 80,000 feet, but it counts as something. Surely that could have been what Mel, if he was an actual person, had probably seen. Powell also made sure to explain that that particular hole was just an old gold shaft mine, maybe forgotten by most, but known to locals who've been out hiking those hills for years. Powell just thought Mel only used this hole to make up stories, as he saw an opportunity to feed off his imagination and drag everyone along with it. Well, almost everyone. Powell didn't think much of it until, in 2001, he got a call out of the blue from a member of a Seattle area discussion group. The caller wasn't a journalist or a government official. He was just a curious guy from an online chat club that was dead set on finding Mel's Hole. They were planning a field trip and wanted geological information like maps, faults, or anything that could help them in their little treasure hunt. And just like that, the story Mel left behind had taken on a life of its own. Think about that for a second. A man calls into a radio show with a story about a bottomless pit, then vanishes. Then suddenly, people began organizing search parties, cross-referencing maps, calling up geologists, and combing through Washington wilderness as if they're hunting for buried treasure. It's wild, but also oddly believable, because people want to believe. They want to think there's still mystery in the world, something untouched, unexplained, unclaimed. But what if I told you that Mel Hole hasn't been the only black bottomless hole reported? With similar descriptions to these holes, how many holes have appeared in different parts of the world? And what does this mean? A similar anomaly. Just when people thought Mels Hole was nothing more than a bizarre one-off mystery from the 90s, something strange started to happen. New stories started coming out, stories that sounded a little too familiar. This time, the reports weren't coming from Washington state. They were coming from the dry, remote deserts of Nevada. At first, it didn't seem like much. There were only rumors here and there about a hole hidden far away in the middle of nowhere with fences surrounding the dead silence. But the more people looked into it, the weirder it got. Even though it had a name, it still had that same eerie energy. It started with geologists and wildlife biologists in the early 1990s, when they stumbled on a vertical shaft hidden in the Amargosa Desert. They didn't believe it was just an ordinary hole. There had to be something more to it. Some people believed it was a portal into a submerged world that had pools of ancient water that held things no one could understand. So they called the hole the Devil's Hole. It wasn't even just the hole that fascinated people, it was the water and what it held. That's when people started talking about the Devil's Hole. And even though it's an actual spot with a real water-filled cavern inside a wildlife refuge, there was something about it that made people uneasy. The locals said animals avoided the area. People noticed their electronics weren't working right when they got close. GPS would go haywire and cell signals disappeared. Rings a bell? That wasn't all. The Devil's Hole wasn't just a creepy name, it was also located uncomfortably close to Area 51, which is a top-secret military base that's been at the center of UFO rumors for decades. Now, here's where things start to connect. Some people believe that Devil's Hole and Mels Hole are more than just similar, and it could just be that these places might somehow be linked underground. There are wild theories that say these holes could be entrances to a vast tunnel network buried deep beneath the earth. Could these be a system of hidden routes carved out long ago by someone or something? Now, that's a question no one has answers to. The more people dug into it, the more stories popped up from around the world. Another strange anomaly called the well-to-hell hoax, just like the Mel Hole and Devil's Hole, also popped up back in the 1980s. At the time, a group in Siberia supposedly drilled so deep into the earth that they claimed to hear unsettling sounds as if coming from the underworld. Even though it was later discovered to be a totally fabricated lie, it got around so fast because people wanted to believe it. Let's not also forget the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia, which was horrific.
Here, it's the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's one of the weirdest internet mysteries in the whole world, and it might actually be solved.
The bodies of the hikers were discovered in a remote area with evidence of a mysterious and unexplained event. No one knows what really happened, but some say they stumbled across something they weren't supposed to find. These stories, as wild as they sound, all seem to be connected. It can't possibly be a coincidence. They all were strange holes having strange energies that had government officials involved, and afterwards, they'd suddenly disappear. That's when the theories and suspicions started building up. Some believe that Mels Hole, Devil's Hole, and others like them couldn't have been natural. They seem like portals you'd only find in sci-fi movies, but this time around, it was actually real. Theorists, geologists, and researchers haven't shied away from dropping their 2 cents on what they believe these holes might be. No one dared for a while to actually find any of these holes until a small team was quietly gearing up for a new expedition of the Mel Hole. They were going to find it, or so they thought. The quest for truth. Mel and the hole he found left a wave of mystery for some people who were adamant on knowing the truth behind what Mel had seen. Because a case like this, with all these missing pieces, never really fade away so easily. It lingered in people's minds, waiting for someone bold or maybe crazy enough to pick up where Mel left off. That someone turned out to be Gerald Osborne, aka Red Elk. He wasn't just looking to chase a ghost story, he wanted to prove that what he saw those years ago could have been what Mel saw. He gathered a team of experts in climbing, hiking, and knowledge about huge holes like that, with the hope that if the hole was ever there, they could find it. They were finally going to put the theories and rumors to rest. Well, as easy as it might have seemed, it was a lot trickier than they expected. They scoured the area surrounding Manistash Ridge as they cross-referenced radio interviews, hand-drawn maps, and decades-old anecdotes from locals who remembered hearing about the pit, and some who even claimed to have seen it. It seemed they might have used drones to fly over hard-to-reach spots, but that is something we don't know. What we do know is that after all the work, time, and effort, even the faintest sign that a bottomless abyss ever existed there. And that's when something occurred to them. The absence of evidence became part of the mystery. How could a hole that was supposedly so deep you could lower 80,000 feet of fishing line into it just vanish? If Mel had made the whole thing up, why were there still people who swore they saw something? And why did the story trigger such strong reactions in the first place? It's easier to believe the hole doesn't exist, but here's the catch. If he was lying, why didn't the expedition find even a normal hole? Not even a collapsed mine or a minor sinkhole turned up in their search. And that brings us to an even bigger question. Was it possible that something beyond human understanding was at play, leaving no trace behind? As much as it'd take a really sophisticated technology to hide or remove a hole as big as what Mel had described, there wouldn't have been one during the 1990s. That leaves us with two options. Either Mel's Hole was a carefully crafted hoax clever enough to survive nearly 3 decades without a single piece of solid evidence, or something real was once there, and someone made sure no one could ever find it again. And here's the thing, despite being buried under years of silence, the story resurfaces without discussions about the hole on various social media platforms by 2012. Later that year, the Daily Record, a local newspaper in Ellensburg, Washington, would run a poll on their Facebook page asking residents if they believed Mel's Hole was real. Some swore it was nonsense. Others said they'd heard things, seen things, and a few admitted, flat out, that they were scared to even go near the ridge where Mel claimed the hole once was. One commenter mentioned hearing about the hole from an older colleague who had since retired, stating, "She said she's heard of it, said she worked with an older man, and he retired a few years ago. He talked with her about it a lot." Another participant in the discussion recalled, "I think the hole is real, but probably not correctly located." It wasn't a scientific poll, sure, but it proved something that couldn't be denied. The story still had teeth. Fast forward to 2018, and the internet took the wheel. On Reddit, a few determined users began trading coordinates, combing through old maps, and dissecting the original coast-to-coast AM interviews like they were classified government files. They even tried to organize a meetup to find the hole themselves. People came from different states, eager to get their boots in the dirt, and maybe, just maybe, be the ones to finally crack the case. Doesn't it make you wonder why this story keeps coming back? Why, in a world overflowing with mysteries, does this one particular hole still get people talking? And more importantly, what happens when the next person decides to go looking? The internet tries to prove Mel's Hole is real. In an era where satellites can zoom into any corner of the Earth, and anyone with a drone or smartphone can become a digital explorer, it's astonishing that some mysteries like the Mel Hole remain unsolved. Back in 2018, Reddit became a hub for amateur investigators attempting to locate the hole. Some users went as far as sharing coordinates in hope of pointing to areas near Ellensburg, Washington. They also claimed these coordinates were blurred on satellite images, and though this has never been verified, it sparks theories of government cover-ups. Some Reddit threads had users going through certain satellite images, noting anomalies, and discussing potential locations. One user observed that certain areas appeared cloned or blurred, fueling speculation that the hole was deliberately hidden. It wasn't just Reddit users who were quite obsessed with finding the hole. Some TikTokers as well were just as intrigued. On TikTok, creators were crazed about the mystery, sharing short videos that combined archival footage, dramatic voiceovers of Mel's original calls to Art Bell, and speculative theories. These bite-sized explorations brought Mels Hole to a younger audience, many of whom were hearing of the legend for the first time. There were also channels on YouTube, like the Y-Files, that created detailed videos talking about the history and theories surrounding Mels Hole. Some creators even ventured into the field, documenting their expeditions to the supposed location. Well, it all came back to nothing, as none were able to uncover any definitive proof that would lead to the hole's existence. Literally, back to square one. Even though none of these creators or users of any social media platform could find concrete proof of there ever being a hole, the online community is determined to solve the mystery. Why Mels Hole still haunts us. Even though it's been over 3 decades since Mel Waters first made that call to the late-night radio show to talk about what he saw on his property that defied what we knew about physics, reality, and even death. And yet, here we are in 2025, still searching, wondering, and talking about it. But there's just something about Mels Hole that doesn't want to let go.
Mel described the hole as a 9-foot in diameter bottomless hole that for years him and others in the area would use as a dumping site.
It could be fear of the unknown, or maybe the hole represents the one thing we all try to avoid thinking about. It's the very idea only talked about by people who think the Earth might one day open and consume everything around it. At this point, some believe it may no longer be just a theory. Many think that locating the hole could unlock the answers to decades of questions that continue to fascinate and divide those who hear the story. Or it's not just fear. The idea of Mels Hole being a part of something bigger leaves everyone on the edge of their seats. Especially with the fact that the government is also in on it, it says a lot. How does Mel, who was so enthusiastic about talking about the hole he found, suddenly called and spoke with caution and fear years later? Not only that, Mel stopped contacting the public, and no trace of the alleged hole was ever confirmed. It only means that there's something somewhere, and there's a lot more that they're not telling us. We all want to believe there's something out there. Tales and folklore we've seen in movies and myths read in books talking of a pit where evil escapes and is seemingly connected to some otherworldly realms. Some native legends speak of sacred openings to other realms, which are places that shouldn't be disturbed. Mels Hole isn't just another story from Washington State or a modern myth stitched into the old world's fabric. It's a universal mystery. This could be why it keeps coming back. Whether it was all made up, exaggerated, or covered up doesn't really matter anymore. What matters is that it's now a legend that has stuck. So is Mels Hole real? Or is it just a story that grew too big to disappear? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on our channel so you never miss any of our uploads. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen to watch more videos like this one.